Australian politics just changed forever as the polling at the Farah election has forced the LNP to finally pick a side. Well, that is quite the bold, provocative claim to kick things off, isn't it? But it's actually the central thesis of the analysis we're unpacking today. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating breakdown by political commentator Topper Field. He's arguing that a massive structural shift is happening literally right beneath our feet in the Australian political landscape. And whether you lean left, right, or straight down the center, the mechanics of what he's describing here are undeniably captivating.
We're calling this one The Fall of the Firewall, Deconstructing Australia's Electoral Shift. We're going to impartially map out this commentator's entire argument. We'll explore the historical context he provides, the bizarre local election acting as the catalyst, and the cold hard electoral math he presents as proof that a decades-old political barrier has just collapsed.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. We'll start with the 25-year political firewall, look at the cracks in the coalition, break down the Farah by-election catalyst, walk through the preference flow electromath, and finish up with the fall of the firewall.
Part 1. The 25-year political firewall.
Okay, so to really grasp why this current shift is such a big deal, we first need to understand the status quo that, according to this analysis, has dominated Australia for a quarter of a century. The commentator points to a concept known as the cordon sanitaire. It's a term political observers use to describe a deliberate systemic firewall. The underlying thesis here is that the major parties, which the source collectively dubs the Uni-Party, grouping the Liberal, National, Labour, and Green parties together in this specific context, essentially formed an unspoken alliance. Their shared goal to systematically lock the right-wing One Nation party out of power. The historical data shows that for decades, the Liberal Party made it crystal clear they'd rather work with Labour than One Nation, consistently placing One Nation below Labour on their official how-to-vote cards.
If we map this out chronologically, for decades leading up to 2017, this absolute firewall was strictly, almost religiously maintained. But around that 2017 mark, the first structural cracks started to show in the alliance. Fast forward to the lead up to the 2026 political cycle, and we hit what the source identifies as the ultimate flashpoint, the Farah by-election. This progression really perfectly illustrates the core argument here, that this wasn't just some overnight anomaly, but a slow, structural fracture that's only just now breaking wide open.
Moving on to Section 2, Cracks in the Coalition.
So what exactly caused this massive 25-year-old firewall to start crumbling in the first place? Well, the analysis points squarely at a major strategic pivot within the Liberal Party. Basically, the sudden emergence of the Teal centrists caused a total panic within the Liberal ranks. Power brokers allegedly insisted that the party had to shift leftward to court these new centrist voters. But in doing so, the source argues the party effectively abandoned its traditional right-wing base. This specific dynamic is why the commentator claims the major parties became virtually indistinguishable, even going so far as to call them Tweedledee and Tweedledummer.
It's perfectly summarized by this idea. The desperate chase for the mythical middle left the right flank entirely exposed. By trying to protect their left flank from the Teals, the Liberal Party essentially created a massive political vacuum on their right. And according to the analysis, One Nation exploded right out of the shadows to fill that exact void.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Farah by-election catalyst. Now, abstract political theory is great and all, but this analysis relies on a very specific, real-world event happening right now to prove its point. The setting is the Farah by-election, and honestly, the setup is described as incredibly bizarre. First off, it was triggered by the early resignation of Liberals Sussan Ley, a move colorfully characterized by the source as a stab in the back to her own party. Second, the Labour Party officially declined to even run a candidate. Insiders reportedly claimed Labour did this to avoid the public embarrassment of polling below 10%, basically stepping aside to let the Liberals maintain the anti-One Nation firewall. But then, in a really strange twist, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese actually traveled to the area to campaign locally against One Nation, despite his own party not even being on the ballot.
Because of all this chaos, the race morphed into a definitive head-to-head showdown. On one side, we have David Farley representing One Nation. Facing off against him is Michelle Melthorpe, an independent who the source describes as Teal-funded. The background provided emphasizes that Melthorpe heavily promotes Teal policies, positioning her firmly as the centrist alternative, even without the official Teal banner.
Now, what's really interesting about the numbers here is that the local polling is just staggering. The frontrunners, Farley and Melthorpe, are effectively tied for first. Meanwhile, the official Liberal candidate is polling at barely half of their numbers. And you literally have to have that again to find the national candidate. The traditional major parties have been completely dwarfed in this local race. It is entirely a two-horse race between One Nation and the Teal-aligned independent.
Let's look at Section 4, Preference Flow Electoral Math.
So as we know, in Australia's preferential voting system, coming in first on the primary vote isn't always enough to secure the win. You have to follow the flow of preferences. And the data highlights an absolutely crucial number, 8%. That is the estimated block of undecided voters in this incredibly tight race. In a dead heat between the two frontrunners, this tiny 8% chunk of the electorate holds immense power, right alongside the preferences of the voters who back the losing major parties.
Let's logically walk through how this mathematical elimination process actually plays out.
Step 1, because they're polling dead last, the national candidate gets eliminated first. Step 2, the Liberal candidate polling second to last among the main contenders is eliminated next. Step 3, all of the votes from the Nationals and the Liberals must now be reallocated based on voter preferences, deciding the final head-to-head matchup between Farley and Millthorpe. What this means in plain English is that the official how-to-vote cards issued by the Liberal and National parties will literally decide the winner of this election.
And this is exactly where the definitive proof of the broken firewall lies, right in the official how-to-vote cards for this election. The Liberal Party ranks their coalition partner, the Nationals, as preference number 1. But crucially, they rank One Nation above the independent Millthorpe. The National Party does the exact same thing, ranking the Liberals first and One Nation second. Think about that. For 25 years, the Liberal and National parties deliberately placed One Nation at the very bottom to freeze them out. Now, they are officially instructing their voters to preference One Nation over the centrist independent.
So, the crucial takeaway is this number right here, 75%. The electoral calculus from the source confidently estimates that because of these official how-to-vote cards, roughly 75% of all Liberal and National preferences will flow directly to One Nation's David Farley.
When you take One Nation's primary vote and combine it with that massive 75% flow of preferences from the eliminated major parties, it easily pushes them up to roughly 48% of the total vote. That means they only need a tiny 2% slice from that pool of undecided voters we talked about earlier to cross the 50% threshold and win the whole thing. The math strongly points to a One Nation victory, entirely facilitated by the Liberal and National parties.
Finally, Section 5, Fall of the Firewall.
So what are the long-term implications of this specific electoral math? The data presented suggests several really sweeping conclusions. First, whether One Nation ultimately wins Farah or not, the systemic firewall is officially broken at the federal level, simply because those how-to-vote cards have already been published. Second, a new, formally allied right-wing voting bloc is forming out of pure political necessity for the Liberals to survive the Teal threat. And third, the source predicts this exact same preference model will likely be forced upon the Liberal Party in upcoming major state elections, like in Victoria, essentially permanently baking this new alliance into the system.
The underlying analysis wraps up this massive shift with a really striking quote. We are seeing the rise of a new political force. The left and the right might actually be different from each other. The core argument here is that by breaking this centrist firewall, Australian politics is moving out of an era of homogenous major parties and entering a new era of distinct, highly polarized ideological blocs. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. If this historic firewall has truly and permanently fallen, what does a formally unified right-wing voting bloc, where the Liberals and Nationals consistently channel their power toward One Nation, actually mean for the future of Australian legislation? Because, this isn't just about politicians playing games. This is a massive structural shift that will dictate the policies, the taxes, and the laws affecting citizens every single day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep your eyes on the data.